Let me ask you something. What happens when a woman walks into a courtroom built to erase her? Not just ignore her voice, but dismantle it. What if the judge isn't just biased, but dirty? What if the system isn't broken, but rigged exactly as intended? This isn't a courtroom drama. This is a war, dressed in legal robes and buried under paperwork. And one woman, Jasmine Crockett, is about to flip the entire table. It starts with a signature. It ends with handcuffs. And everything in between is a reckoning. Let's begin. The morning air clung to the walls of the U.S. District Court in Manhattan like a thick, gray fog. Cold wind whipped down Center Street, rattling the metal barricades set up around the courthouse steps. Protest signs bobbed violently in the crowd. Stop the show trial, justice or theater, we see through the robes. Reporters huddled in clusters, microphones trembling in gloved hands as cameras rolled. On the steps, Serena Delgado from Veritas News faced the lens with her signature intensity, her breath visible in the air. This isn't about guilt or innocence, she declared. This is about whether justice still breathes inside that courtroom, or whether it's been choked to death by power. Across the street, a black SUV slowed to a stop. The door opened, and Jasmine Crockett stepped out. She wore a tailored gray suit that matched the city's steel gray skyline. Her hair pinned with precision, her gaze unreadable. In her hand she carried a thick file marked, State v. Kincaid. Each step she took across the courthouse plaza echoed like the roll of a battle drum. The granite beneath her feet seemed to vibrate with anticipation. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't need to. She already knew what they were thinking. As she climbed the courthouse steps, a gust of wind whipped her coat open, revealing the flash of a deep red blouse beneath. The camera panned upward, capturing the determined set of her jaw, the clarity in her eyes. This wasn't a woman walking into a trial. This was a soldier walking into a siege. Inside the courtroom, the air shifted the moment she entered. A dense silence took hold, not reverent, but watchful. Judge Horace Whitmore sat elevated at the bench, fingers rhythmically tapping on the polished oak surface. His face was carved from stone, lips drawn into a near frown, eyes like surgical steel, sharp, assessing, cold. His robe draped around him like armor. To the right, Preston Kincaid sat at the defense table like he owned the room. Legs crossed, fingers steepled, lips curled into the faintest of smirks. His posture oozed confidence, or perhaps immunity. The billionaire real estate mogul looked more like someone preparing to close a deal than face felony charges. Riley Quinn, the secondary prosecutor, sat beside Jasmine with a quiet but calculating expression. Her eyes tracked every movement Jasmine made, as though trying to decide if this new lead prosecutor was here to win or to fall. The clerk called the room to order, but the gavel never fell. Judge Whitmore raised his hand slightly instead, almost as if to silence a child before a tantrum. Jasmine stood, composed, spine straight. "Your Honor, this case presents—" "You may stop there, Ms. Crockett," Whitmore interrupted, his voice flat and icy. "I assume this won't be another lecture disguised as legal work?" A soft ripple of laughter broke through the gallery, just sharp enough to pierce. One court officer coughed in amusement. A courtroom clerk stifled a grin. The defense attorney chuckled under his breath without looking up from his tablet. Jasmine didn't move. Her fingers rested lightly on the podium, her other hand clutching the file. She didn't glare, she didn't flinch. Her gaze drifted slowly toward Whitmore, her jaw tight, her posture unchanged. For a long moment, the room hung in limbo, waiting for her to react, to shrink, to snap, to retreat. She did none of those things. Instead, she inhaled. Long, silent, steady. Her shoulders didn't rise. Her expression didn't crack. But something shifted. It wasn't visible, not yet, but it was there, in the way her knuckles tightened against the file, in the flicker of heat behind her calm, brown eyes, in the stillness that wasn't surrender but calculation. She was surrounded by those waiting to see her falter. And she knew it. But she also knew this. She hadn't stepped into this courtroom just to argue a case. She'd stepped into it to confront an institution that had silenced people like her for generations. And that war, cold, quiet, relentless, had just begun. The silence hadn't lifted, it only deepened. Jasmine stood tall behind the prosecution's table, a thin binder now open in front of her. The screen behind her flickered to life with a detailed spreadsheet, columns of figures pulled from the East Flatbush redevelopment project. She didn't look at the audience, the press, or even at the judge. She spoke directly to the jury, her voice steady, calm, and deliberate. This line item reflects a $2,900,000 increase in expenditure, she began, pointing to the highlighted row. This increase doesn't match any budget amendment approved by the state finance department. And yet, she clicked the remote again. Those funds were transferred. The room didn't move. Even the jurors, who moments ago seemed disinterested, now sat a little straighter. A few exchanged glances. One leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Jasmine continued, unfazed. I will now submit 2 supporting documents into evidence, the original approval memo from the Office of Budget Oversight, and the line-by-line reconciliation prepared by state auditors. Her tone was clean, clinical, like a surgeon preparing for a procedure. She reached for the first document. But before the file could even leave her hand, a sound cracked through the room like a whip. Bang! Judge Whitmore's gavel came down, sharp and dismissive. He didn't look at the screen, didn't ask for clarification. We're not turning this courtroom into a spreadsheet convention, Miss Crockett, he said with a low, bored chuckle. If we were, perhaps we should have invited an accountant instead of a prosecutor. The laughter this time was louder. It rolled in softly, like a rising tide. Chuckles from the defense bench, a soft snort from the clerk's table, even a muffled giggle from somewhere in the jury box. Jasmine's hand froze in place. The slap wasn't physical, but it landed with brutal precision. She turned slowly toward the bench, her eyes locking with Whitmore's. Her expression didn't flicker, but behind that calm mask something churned. Rage, cold and controlled. The kind of rage that didn't scream but waited. Sharpened. Across the room, Serena Delgado typed furiously into her laptop, her jaw clenched so tightly it could have snapped. Her screen read, Judge silences budget probe with a smirk. Whitmore strikes again. Minutes later, Court Line 24 ran the headline. Levitt's circus hits wall. On Twitter, the hashtag Spreadsheet trial exploded. Memes flooded the timeline. Jasmine's face pasted over a drowning figure beneath cascading Excel sheets. One showed her holding a magnifying glass over a dollar sign with the caption, When your case has no heart, only charts. The room may have been full, but Jasmine had never felt more alone. From the jury, one man scratched the back of his neck and looked away. A woman tapped her pen twice, then let it fall into her lap with a sigh. Another simply stared at the ceiling tiles, as if they might offer some distraction. Even Riley Quinn, who had sat silently beside Jasmine since the trial began, didn't speak. She shifted in her seat, crossed her arms, and stared at the binder as though unsure whether it was evidence or dead weight. Her silence said enough. Jasmine didn't look at them. She couldn't. Instead, she lowered her hand and quietly slid the binder shut. Her fingers were trembling slightly, just enough that the clasp clicked awkwardly as she closed it. She reached for her pen, drew a faint line through a corner of the file, her own private ledger of battles lost and lines crossed. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The message had been made loud and clear. Her voice, her work, her facts, none of them mattered in this room. Not under this judge, not under this system. She sat down. Composed, yes, but her knuckles were pale as bone, her hand still gripping the pen like it was the last weapon she had. The camera caught her from behind, shoulders squared, head unbowed, the soft hum of courtroom whispers rising around her like smoke. But her eyes said something different. They scanned the room, not with defeat, but with purpose. Each scoff, each smirk, each look of condescension, she logged it. Not with the intent to fight them here, not yet. But she was waiting. And when she struck next, it would be with something no one could laugh away. Jasmine rose slowly from her seat, her motions measured but deliberate. The tension in the room hadn't loosened since the judge's dismissive jab, but this time, something shifted in her presence. She didn't need the jury's full attention. They were already watching her, perhaps waiting for another swing at a wall too high to climb. But Jasmine wasn't swinging blindly. This was calculated. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, cream-colored folder, the seal of the New York State Department of Finance embossed clean across the front. The moment her hand touched the document, the atmosphere subtly shifted, like a storm gathering without thunder. She stepped to the screen, her heels tapping in crisp rhythm, and clipped the top page into the projector's mount. The screen lit up with a budget approval form. Clean lines, state headers, official stamps. "This is a formal authorization request," Jasmine said calmly, "for a public fund disbursement totaling $2,850,000 from the Urban Redevelopment Allocation to Kincaid Urban Ventures." Several jurors blinked. One leaned forward again. Jasmine flipped to the final page, her voice dropping only slightly as she said, "And here, at the bottom, is the signature that authorized the release." The screen changed. There it was, in bold black ink. Judge Horace Whitmore. It sat on the page like a gun in the middle of a dinner table. Obvious, dangerous, impossible to ignore. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. Whitmore froze. His knuckles, which had rhythmically tapped the bench through most of the morning, went still. His shoulders stiffened. But it was his eyes that betrayed him. They didn't rise to meet Jasmine's or the jury's. They stayed locked on that signature, as if denying its existence might make it vanish, as if even he couldn't believe he'd been so careless. Across the courtroom, Preston Kincaid sat rigid. His previously casual posture gave way to tight discomfort. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing, and his hand moved instinctively to adjust his cufflink. A subtle, meaningless gesture in a moment that suddenly meant everything. Even Riley Quinn shifted, her expression no longer neutral. She leaned slightly to her left, studying the signature. Her gaze flicked to Whitmore, then back again. Something in her had clicked. The line between doubt and belief had begun to blur. Then Whitmore spoke. "That document," he said, his voice rasping from a throat suddenly dry, "is taken out of context." The words hung in the air like a deflated balloon. No anger, no objection, no legal basis, just a thin veil of dismissal stretched over a chasm. No one responded, not the defense, not the jury, not even the court staff who once smirked at Jasmine's every move. The silence wasn't the same as before. It was heavier now. Not hostile, but stunned. The authority that had once weighed down the room like steel was beginning to crack, like glass spiderwebbing beneath pressure. Serena Delgado's fingers danced across her keyboard. Within seconds, her tweet hit the internet like a match to dry brush. Whitmore's signature just detonated the courtroom. "This isn't bias, it's personal." The retweets began before she even hit send on her second post. Within minutes, WhitmoreGate trended, dragging the trial from courtrooms to dinner tables across the country. Some viewers gasped, some clapped, but all of them understood what that signature meant. And yet Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile, or even raise an eyebrow. She simply reached for the remote, turned off the projector, and carefully folded the document back into its folder. With slow precision, she aligned the pages, fastened the clasp, and slid the file beneath her arm. Her hand paused briefly atop the table, just long enough to rest on the silver box that had been sitting there since morning. The courtroom lights caught the edge of the lid, casting a sliver of reflection onto the lacquered wood. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. Her fingers gently drummed against the box. Inside was the tape. The next piece. She didn't announce it. She didn't need to. The entire courtroom could feel it. Whatever came next wasn't going to be numbers or paperwork. It was going to be something they couldn't unhear. And Whitmore, he knew it too. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. But even a whisper, when spoken with truth, can crack the foundation of corruption. What we've seen isn't the end, but a beginning. A spark in the darkness. Proof that even the strongest systems can be challenged when truth refuses to be silenced. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and stay with us, because part 2 is coming, and the fight for justice is just getting started.